The sky over Tehran lit up again before most people had finished their morning coffee. 80 Israeli fighter jets, backed by American refueling tankers, carved through Iranian airspace like the country had no say in the matter because by that point it nearly didn't. What they left behind in Tabriz and Mahabad wasn't wreckage. The IDF used a very specific word: dismantled. 16 aircraft belonging to the Irg's Quds Force, the fleet used to funnel weapons, cash, and military hardware to Hezbollah and Iran's proxy network across the region gone. And with them, something far harder to replace. Iran's last KC-747 tanker, a military variant of the Boeing 747-100, the single aircraft that gave Iranian jets the legs to project power beyond their own borders. Not damaged, not grounded, gone. In the same strike wave, Israel hit the Air Force's Central Air Defense Operations Room, the nerve center built to stitch together Iran's entire aerial surveillance and response network into one coherent picture. It was active when it was hit. People were inside. That's where we are on day 9. But to understand why this matters beyond the kill list, you have to understand what Iran's Air Force actually was before the first bomb ever fell, because the story of its collapse tells you everything about the deeper war underneath this one. The Islamic Republic of Iran Air Force FLI's American jets, F-14 Tomcats, F-4 Phantoms, F-5 Tigers, aircraft designed by Grumman, McDonnell Douglas, and Northrop, delivered to the Shah before the 1979 revolution, turned Iran into America's most committed enemy. These jets are now between 45 and 55 years old. They have been maintained in complete isolation from their original manufacturers for nearly half a century. No parts, no supply chain, no factory support, just Iranian engineers cannibalizing one aircraft to keep another in the air, pulling retired technicians back into service because the institutional knowledge was literally dying. The Washington Institute for Near East Policy noted that Iran had to bring experienced technicians out of retirement just to keep its fleet marginally operational. Flight Global documented that Iran lacks any modern airborne early warning capability, meaning they couldn't manage a contested air battle the way us and Israeli forces can. And then the war started. An Israeli Air Force commander described what happened when Iranian pilots encountered F-35s and F-15s over their own country. They took off, they saw what was coming, they turned around the Air Force that achieved a 5-to-1 kill ratio against Iraq in the 1980s, the force whose F-14 pilots were so lethal that Iraqi commanders ordered their own pilots to avoid them entirely. That force looked at fifth-generation stealth aircraft and chose not to engage, not from cowardice, from math. Their equipment was built for 1979. The enemy was built for 2026. Meanwhile, Iran's most modern platforms, the Russian-supplied Su-24s and MiG-29s, fared no better in actual combat. On March 2nd, the Qatari Air Force shot down two Iranian Su-24s with F-15 CAS, two Iranian aircraft shot down by Qatar. That single engagement tells you more about Iran's conventional air position in this conflict than any damage assessment could. Here's what matters, though. Iran knew this was coming. Not the specific date, not the specific operation, but the fundamental gap. They've known it for decades, so they made a choice. Rather than pouring resources into an aging Western fleet they could never properly rebuild, Iran invested elsewhere. They built missiles. They built drones. They built an intricate proxy architecture, Hezbollah, the Houthis, Iraqi militias, networks stretching across the region that could strike in multiple directions without a single Iranian aircraft ever leaving the ground. The Air Force was left to cannibalize itself because the Irg's missile program and its drone production lines were the real bet. The IRIAF was a legacy institution. The drones were the future. That strategic calculation is exactly what makes the current bombing campaign so revealing and so complicated. The US-Israeli operation has achieved things that genuinely don't have modern historical precedent. CENTCOM Commander Admiral Brad Cooper confirmed air dominance over Iran, meaning Israeli and American aircraft can operate anywhere inside Iranian airspace without meaningful risk of interception. IDF Chief of Staff Major General Herzi Halevi confirmed approximately 2,500 strikes using over 6,000 munitions, 80% of Iran's air defense systems destroyed. Iranian ballistic missile launches down 90% from the opening days. Defense Secretary Hegseth called it twice the air power of Shakana in 2003. Trump told reporters, no Navy, no Air Force, no air detection, no radar. And in the narrow, measurable, conventional sense, he's not wrong. Iran's drone carrier was struck in the opening hours. Within 2 days, Iran went from 11 ships in the Gulf of Oman to 0. the Parchin and Shared ballistic missile production facilities. Where Iran manufactures the overwhelming majority of its missiles were struck in assessments the IDF says set Iranian missile production back by years. The Irg's Malik Ashtar building in central Tehran destroyed, Iran's parliament targeted, the assembly of experts in Qom, where clerics were mid-session selecting the next supreme leader, bombed, the secretary of that council was killed along with vote-counting officials. On March 7th, the IDF struck the underground bunker beneath Tehran's leadership compound 50 aircraft, targeting the emergency command center still being used by senior Iranian officials after Khamenei's death. The operational execution is extraordinary by any technical military measure. This is a dominant campaign. And yet, the National Intelligence Council, the U.S. intelligence body that serves the president who authorized this war, completed a classified assessment approximately 1 week before the bombing began. According to 3 sources familiar with its contents, that report concluded the Iranian regime was unlikely to be toppled even by a large-scale assault. It outlined succession protocols. It assessed that Iran's opposition was unlikely to seize control. The intelligence community told the president, the regime survives. 3 days later, the bombs fell anyway. 9 days in, the regime has not fallen. The chaos inside Iran is real. Baloch militia groups have claimed attacks on security commanders in Zahedan. Kurdish opposition forces are positioned on the Iranian border with Israeli intelligence support. The Irg Intelligence Directorate issued a public warning that any domestic disruption would be treated as direct cooperation. With the enemy, the Intelligence Ministry explicitly threatened Iranian citizens, calling potential collaborators Israeli soldiers. A security apparatus issuing those warnings is genuinely alarmed, but a security apparatus still capable of issuing those warnings across 26 of Iran's 31 provinces simultaneously while absorbing the most intense bombing campaign conducted against any country since World War II is not a security apparatus in its final hours. ACLED, the Armed Conflict Location and Event Data Project, published their special Middle East report on March 7th. Their conclusion was direct. Given that the Islamic Republic is more likely to continue fighting than to concede, the war's trajectory may prove more protracted and unpredictable than decision-makers in Washington anticipated, more protracted, more unpredictable than anticipated. Iran has fired over 500 ballistic and naval missiles and nearly 2,000 drones since February 28th. The launch rate has dropped 90%. The IDF attributes this to launcher destruction, while the AE and IS will identify an equally credible explanation: rationing, Iran deliberately conserving its remaining capability. For the later phases of a war it has explicitly said it prepared for over the long term. Ali Larijani publicly declared Iran will not negotiate. Simultaneously, US and Arab officials told the Wall Street Journal that Larijani himself had been quietly exploring off-ramps. Public defiance, private pragmatism. The outcome of this war will be decided in the gap between those two positions. And through all of it, the drones keep coming. This is the part that the destruction of the Irg's Air Force Situation Room, as strategically significant as it genuinely is, cannot fix. Destroying the command center doesn't destroy the drones. It isolates the surviving air defense components from each other, strips them of a common operating picture, turns a network into a collection of disconnected sensors. That's real degradation. But the Shad 136S, the Shad 1-9S, the Rod 2S, they aren't stored in the hangars that were dismantled on March 7th. They're dispersed, buried in launch sites across southeastern Iran, cheap enough to absorb losses and keep flying. U.S. sources confirmed to American journalists that Iranian shades are currently the most dangerous threat because they are getting through air defenses. The aircraft that fled from Israeli F-35s were never really Iran's Air Force. Iran's Air Force in 2026 is a drone that costs a few $1,000s, needs no pilot, and doesn't need a command center to fly toward a target. 6 Iowa logistics reservists are dead. 3 THAAD radars valued at $1.5 billion have been destroyed. The Strait of Hormuz is closed and 150 ships sit anchored waiting. Munitions stockpiles are depleting faster than production lines can refill them. The Irg's drone unit struck Al Dafra Air Base again this morning even. As the Iranian president apologized to Gulf states and promised to stop, the Irg and the Iranian president are operating on different orders. That last detail is the most honest picture of what this war has actually produced. Not a regime in collapse, a state that is fractured in some directions and hardening in others, severely damaged but not defeated, publicly defiant and privately searching for an exit, firing drones from a president who just promised to stop. Germany's Chancellor Merz stood outside the White House after meeting Trump and said plainly that this plan carries risk and the consequences will be borne by the broader international community. Britain has confirmed it could strike Iranian sites in self-defense and hasn't. The coalition conducting Operation Epic Fury is, and has, been from the first strike, a coalition of two. $3.7 billion spent in the first 100 hours, extraordinary military precision, undeniable tactical dominance, and still, 9 days in, no one in Washington has answered the question that should have been answered before the first jet ever left the runway. What comes next? What is your age? Read the ACLED Special Report. Read the National Intelligence Council Assessment. Read what was struck in East Tehran's military district on March 4th, the IRG headquarters, the Quds Force Command, the Intelligence Directorate, the Cyber Unit, the Protest Suppression Unit, all hit in a single wave. Understand what has been destroyed. Understand what hasn't. And then ask the people who started this war without a congressional vote, without your consent, and while abandoning diplomatic channels both sides said we're progressing not what percentage of launchers are neutralized, not what's been knocked out, what comes next.